The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 united Pueblo tribes versus Spanish conquistadors. On August 10, 1680, the Pueblo people launched a rebellion against Spanish colonizers. For years, they endured violence, cruelty, starvation, exploitation of their labor and resources, as well as harassment and persecution for their religious practices. Despite their larger population, the Puebloans faced a formidable enemy in the Spanish, who were well organized and heavily armed. The Spanish forces were equipped with firearms and steel weapons that far surpassed the capabilities of the Puebloans. Eventually, Pueblo leaders recognized that negotiations with the Spaniards were futile and that their survival depended on taking up arms. Resistance became their only viable option. This struggle was fundamentally about survival. Each Pueblo community functioned as an independent nation, and prior to this uprising, they had never united. To fully grasp the significance of this pivotal historical event, it is essential to look back 140 years to the arrival of the Spaniards in Puebloan territory. The Spaniards first set foot in the region in 1540 under the command of Conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. This expedition aimed to discover gold, silver, silk, spices, and land suitable for forced labor, a prevalent and lucrative practice in the Spanish-controlled territories of Mexico. The expedition comprised 2,000 troops, including Spanish soldiers and their indigenous allies from Mexico. The initial assault was directed at the Zuni village of Jahuecu. Aware of the Spanish conquests in Mexico, the Zuni had already moved their women, children, and elderly to the Mesotop sanctuary by the time Coronado arrived. Although Zuni warriors attempted to defend their territory, they were outnumbered and outmatched by the Spaniards, who possessed superior weaponry and horses. The village was captured, but the anticipated gold was not found. Delegates from the Pecos Pueblo approached the Spaniards, offering to lead them to affluent tribes in the east that had been raiding their lands, likely viewing this as a strategic opportunity to enlist the Spaniards against their enemies. Additionally, the Spaniards had valuable goods to trade, including horses, sheep, and steel. During his journey to Pecos, Coronado encountered the Tiwa communities, who were cultivating the rich floodplains of the Rio Grande. Facing dwindling food supplies and nearly exhausted rations from the Zuni territory, Coronado opted to establish a winter encampment. The Spaniards forcibly expelled the Tiwa inhabitants from the Quahua Pueblo, converting it into a military stronghold. Archaeological findings indicate that a conflict occurred over the pueblo. Coronado demanded provisions from the Tiwa, Querés, and Tewa Pueblos. While some supplies were exchanged, the Tiwa ceased trading after a while, realizing they could not sustain themselves through the winter. In response, Coronado commanded his men to seize supplies by force, leaving the Pueblos in a state of hunger and cold. The Spaniards also committed assaults against women. In retaliation, the Tiwa killed several horses and mules. Consequently, Coronado ordered an attack on a nearby village called Arenal, where the Spaniards killed all the male warriors and burned 30 of them alive at the stake. The Tiwa sought refuge in a stronghold atop a mesa. Coronado was unable to penetrate their defenses and laid siege from January to March of 1541, ultimately forcing the Tiwa to surrender when they ran out of food and water. In their attempt to flee, they were captured by the Spaniards. The men were executed, and most of the women were killed as well. Those women who survived were taken as slaves. Later that same year, Coronado and his forces departed. In 1598, the Spaniards returned to Puebloan territory under the leadership of Conquistador Juan de Oñate. Oñate partitioned the land into 7 provinces and assigned priests to each, with the aim of converting the indigenous population to Christianity, imposing taxes, and exploiting them for labor and land. Only a small number of priests were accepting of the Puebloans' religious customs. The majority condemned these practices as heretical, leading to the destruction of kivas, sacred chambers used for social and spiritual gatherings, and the prohibition of ceremonial activities, along with the desecration of sacred items. The Spanish demands for tribute and labor exacerbated the already challenging conditions faced by the Puebloans, particularly during the harsh winter months. In response to this oppression, the Pueblo communities frequently revolted against their oppressors. However, these uprisings typically involved only a small number of Puebloans, lacking the necessary warriors and weaponry for success. Spanish authorities often detected and swiftly suppressed these rebellions before they could gain momentum. Dissidents were either executed or sold into slavery. In 1598, the Acoma Pueblo refused to provide food tribute to the Spaniards. Acoma's leader, Zutacapan, was aware of the impending Spanish assault. Understanding the fate that awaited those who resisted, he sought to negotiate. When the two parties convened, 17 Spaniards arrived and demanded food, which the natives once again refused. The Spaniards began their assault on the women of Acoma, which led to a confrontation resulting in the deaths of 12 Spaniards. Following this incident, under Oñate's orders, 70 soldiers set out to retaliate against the Acoma Pueblo. They reached the site in January 1599. Of the approximately 6,000 individuals residing in or near Acoma Pueblo, around 2,000 were identified as warriors. After 3 days of intense fighting, the Spaniards breached the village using artillery. The battle claimed the lives of 500 warriors, along with about 300 women and children. The Spaniards took around 500 individuals captive, imposing severe penalties on all males over the age of 25, which included amputation of their right foot and a 20-year term of enslavement. Furthermore, all males aged 12 to 25 and females over 12 were also condemned to 20 years of servitude. 60 of the youngest women were enslaved and transported to Mexico City. Additionally, 2 Hopi men were apprehended, one of whom had a hand severed before they were released as a warning to other pueblos regarding the consequences of opposing Spanish authority. Upon learning of the massacre and the subsequent punishments, King Philip of Spain exiled Oñate from New Mexico due to his brutal treatment of the indigenous people, and he later returned to Spain. Oñate's actions in Acoma left a lasting impact, instilling fear and shock among neighboring pueblos. Despite their cultural and linguistic differences, the pueblos and tribes in the area were interconnected, and news of such events spread rapidly. As the new century approached, little changed in the region. Catholic missionaries sought to dismantle the traditional Pueblo way of life in every conceivable manner. The priests imposed strict regulations on beliefs, marriage, labor, daily living, and prayer. During his brief tenure as governor of New Mexico from 1659 to 1660, Bernardo López de Mendizámo endeavored to diminish the priests' influence, forbidding them from compelling the native population to work without compensation and recognizing the Pueblo people's right to practice their traditions, including their sacred dances. The Spanish Inquisition found him guilty of heresy and charged him with 33 counts of misconduct in the practice of Judaism. The clergy reinstated their approach of religious intolerance. In 1607, the provincial governor founded the town of Santa Fe, which would later be recognized as the capital of the area. During the 1660s and 1670s, severe drought and abnormally high temperatures exacerbated living conditions. All indigenous groups, including the Puebloans, Apache, Navajo, and Comanche, faced starvation. This dire situation prompted other tribes to raid the Pueblos. When raiders were unsuccessful in finding food, they resorted to kidnapping individuals and selling them into slavery in exchange for sustenance. Even when food was available, the Spaniards would seize it, leaving the Puebloans in a state of hunger. Caught between the oppressive Spanish rule and the raids from neighboring tribes, the Puebloans endured immense hardship. The Puebloans believed that their struggles and the ongoing drought were a result of the disruption of their religious practices. Their population, which was estimated to be between 40,000 and 80,000 in the mid-1500s, had dwindled to approximately 15,000 by the late 1600s, largely due to violence, forced labor, European diseases, and famine. In 1675, Governor Juan Francisco Trevino ordered the arrest of 47 Pueblo medicine men, accusing them of conspiring to incite a rebellion. 4 of these men received death sentences, with 3 hanged and 1 taking his own life. The remaining individuals were publicly whipped and condemned to slavery. In response, the Puebloans surrounded the governor's office in Santa Fe with 70 warriors, demanding the release of their medicine man. Governor Trevino acquiesced, as most of his military forces were engaged in combat with the Apaches. He was reluctant to provoke further conflict given the increasing aggression of both the Apaches and the Navajo, which strained his limited military resources. One of the medicine men released was Pope, a Tewa healer from the San Juan Pueblo. Little information is available about Popa's life before his imprisonment. It is believed he was born around 1630, a time marked by significant suffering and adversity. Pope was characterized as a formidable and charismatic figure, commanding respect that often bordered on fear among those who interacted with him. Following his release from incarceration, he withdrew to Taos Pueblo, known for being the northernmost and most secluded of the Pueblos. The inhabitants of Taos Pueblo were recognized for their staunch resistance against Spanish colonization. Pope set about organizing a rebellion with a definitive goal: to expel the Spaniards from their ancestral lands, eliminate their influence, and restore traditional ways of life. He initiated covert discussions with leaders from nearly all the Pueblos. Over the course of 5 years, he traveled secretly to 45 Pueblos, strategizing and coordinating the uprising. In a drastic move, he even killed his son-in-law, Nicolas Bua, out of fear that he might inform the Spaniards. Notably, the Apache and Navajo, typically seen as adversaries, also took part, although details regarding their involvement in the planning remain scarce. Pope garnered support from the northern Tiwa, Tewa, Towa, Tano, and Cara-speaking Pueblos of the Rio Grande Valley. Pecos Pueblo, located 50 miles east of the Rio Grande, joined the cause, as did the Zuni and Hopi, situated 120 and 200 miles to the west, respectively. However, the 4 southern Tiwa towns near Santa Fe and the Piro Pueblos near present-day Socorro chose not to participate in the revolt. The southern Tiwa and Piro had become more integrated with Spanish culture than the other communities. Due to concerns about their loyalty, Pope felt he could not trust them. Before the arrival of the Spanish, the Pueblo communities were not unified. They were divided by language and cultural differences. For over a century, the population had been under occupation, communicating in Spanish and united by a shared animosity towards a common adversary. From his stronghold at Taos Pueblo, Pope and his followers devised their strategy and organized their assault, setting the date for the uprising on August 11, 1680. He sent messengers to all the Pueblos, providing them with knotted cords. He instructed the leaders of the Pueblos to untie 1 knot from the cord each morning. The final knot's removal would signal the day for their collective uprising against the Spaniards. He ordered each Pueblo to set fire to the church, eliminate the resident priest, and either kill or expel the Spanish settlers. The Puebloans aimed to dismantle the surrounding Spanish settlements and gather in Santa Fe to either kill or drive out the remaining Spaniards. However, shortly before the planned date, leaders from the southern Tiwa alerted the Spaniards about the impending revolt. On August 9, 1680, the Spaniards captured 2 of the messengers and subjected them to torture until they disclosed the meaning of the knotted cord. The Spanish population, approximately 2,400, which included mestizos of mixed heritage and native servants, was dispersed across the provinces. Santa Fe was the only major town with 170 soldiers available for its defense. Aware that their plan had been compromised, the rebellion's leaders opted to initiate the revolt a day earlier. They sent out new instructions through runners, but the Acoma, Zuni, and Hopi Pueblos did not receive the message in time due to the considerable distance from Taos to the western Pueblos. Consequently, they adhered to the original schedule. On August 10, 1680, the Tewa, Tiwa, and other Carasan-speaking Pueblos, along with the Apaches, simultaneously rose against the Spanish. The Zuni, Hopi, and Acoma were a day behind. They seized the Spaniards' horses and blocked the roads leading to Santa Fe. In response, Governor Oderman organized the city's defenses to protect the capital. By August 13th, Pueblo warriors had obliterated all Spanish settlements in the province and were advancing towards the capital. In response, Governor Oderman dispatched heavily armed relief groups to guide stranded colonists to the relative safety of Santa Fe. By August 15th, nearly 1,000 individuals had sought refuge in the governor's palace, encircled by an army of 2,500 native warriors. The Spaniards faced a dire situation, lacking both water and sufficient food supplies. Meanwhile, over 1,000 Spanish survivors from the Rio Abajo, led by Lieutenant Governor Alonso Garcia, had assembled in Isleta, located 70 miles south of Santa Fe. However, neither group was aware of the other's presence. On August 21st, the Spaniards made a breakout from the governor's palace, launching a costly counteroffensive to expel the warriors from the city, which provided the refugees with an opportunity to escape. They commenced their arduous journey southward. The refugees in Isleta were also moving south when they learned of the other survivors. They paused in Socorro, awaiting the arrival of the Santa Fe refugees, and subsequently traveled together to El Paso on September 27th. Despite the Spanish forces being heavily armed, Puebloan warriors tracked their movements all the way to the border without launching an attack. The revolt resulted in the deaths of 400 Spaniards and an undetermined number of Puebloans, with 21 out of 33 priests losing their lives. Nevertheless, 2,000 Spaniards managed to survive. Following the revolt, Pope emerged as the leader of the Pueblo Alliance for a short time. Alongside his 2 lieutenants, Alonso Catiti and Luis Tupatu, he traveled from village to village, advocating a return to traditional practices. They commanded all Pueblos to dismantle crosses, churches, and Christian symbols. The Pueblos reinstated the kivas and instructed the populace to purify themselves through ritual baths, to adopt their Pueblo names, and to eliminate all remnants of Christianity and Spanish culture, including Spanish livestock and fruit trees. Pope prohibited the cultivation of wheat and barley. He instructed those who were married in the Catholic Church to abandon their wives and take new partners in accordance with Puebloan customs. Many Puebloans, who were unaccustomed to collaborative political efforts and valued their independence, disregarded his commands. They resented his attempts at control, leading many to label him a tyrant. Moreover, there were Puebloans who had genuinely embraced Christianity, and many had relatives or friends among the Spanish. Approximately a year after the revolt, the Pueblo Council removed Pope from his position, although he was re-elected shortly before his death in 1688. Following his passing, the alliance among the Pueblos disintegrated. For 12 years, the Pueblos successfully thwarted the Spanish from re-entering, repelling attempts in 1681 and 1687. However, the ongoing drought, coupled with crop failures and famine, took a toll. With the absence of Spanish forces, the Pueblos became vulnerable to raids from Apache, Navajo, and Comanche groups. In 1692, Diego de Vargas, the general and governor of New Mexico, initiated a military and political effort to reclaim Puebloan territory. In August of that year, Vargas advanced to Santa Fe without facing any opposition. He expected resistance from Pecos Pueblo, but they greeted him warmly. Pecos even contributed 140 additional warriors to assist him in recapturing Santa Fe. Vargas was accompanied by 60 Spanish soldiers, 100 native auxiliaries, 7 cannons, and 1 Franciscan priest. Upon his arrival in Santa Fe in September, he met with 1,000 Puebloans, assuring them of protection if they pledged loyalty to the King of Spain. The discussions lasted several days, and ultimately the Puebloans agreed, as the Spaniards were no longer seen as their primary adversary. In the following month, Vargas visited other pueblos, imposing Spanish authority. While he occasionally faced resistance, he was often met with a warm welcome. The returning Spanish adopted a less stringent approach and began to view the pueblos as a buffer between themselves and the English and French, considering them potential allies. Nonetheless, this does not imply that hostilities ceased entirely. In the early 1690s, Vargas intensified his control over the region. Consequently, in 1693, during a visit to Santa Fe, he encountered 70 warriors along with 400 of their family members obstructing his path. He commanded his forces to launch an attack, which resulted in a swift victory for the Spanish troops. Vargas executed the warriors and condemned their family members to 10 years of servitude. In 1696, 14 pueblos initiated a second organized uprising. This insurrection led to the deaths of 5 missionaries and 34 settlers, prompting a harsh and extended retaliation from Vargas. By the conclusion of the 1600s, Vargas had secured the capitulation of most pueblos in the area, although many Puebloans escaped and allied with Apache or Navajo groups. The Spanish were unable to persuade certain pueblos to swear loyalty to the Spanish Empire, and their distance made reconquest efforts impractical. For instance, the Hopi successfully resisted any Spanish attempts at reconquest, despite several failed efforts by the Spanish to negotiate a peace treaty or establish trade relations. In this context, the revolt effectively reduced European influence on the lifestyles of some pueblos. The conflict and its aftermath severely weakened both the Spanish and the Puebloans. However, Puebloan independence from Spanish rule was short-lived. Spanish attempts to eliminate their culture and religion eventually subsided. The revolt may have also facilitated the spread of horses across the Great Plains. The Spanish modified their perspectives and policies, which likely prevented further atrocities as they extended their empire westward into California. They banned forced labor and tribute demands in New Mexico. Additionally, the Spaniards granted significant land allocations to each pueblo and designated a public defender to safeguard their rights and represent their legal interests in Spanish courts. The priests returning to New Mexico also changed their stance, showing greater tolerance for Puebloan religious practices. The revolt played a crucial role in ensuring the cultural continuity of the Pueblo people and highlighted their resilience. This is one of the reasons the Pueblos were able to preserve their lands, languages, customs, and religious practices. Subsequently, Pueblo warriors and Spanish soldiers formed alliances to combat their mutual adversaries, including the Apache, Navajo, and Comanche. Thank you for watching. We encourage you to support our community by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our YouTube channel for more engaging historical content.